Disney's The Little Mermaid has gone down as one of the studio's biggest properties and most influential movies of all time. It brought the company's animation department back into the spotlight, is often cited as bringing the true Broadway musical to the big screen, had a huge role in inspiring Disney's iconic 90s lineup, and perhaps most importantly, put Disney back on top. Even decades later, the Oscar-winning reimagining of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale is as iconic as ever, and despite a turbulent production and lots of pressure, tolls to one of the studio's biggest successes. Up until Oliver and Company and Who Framed Roger Rabbit in 1988, Disney's feature films had been on a steady decline. The company had lost focus after the loss of Walt and Roy O. Disney in 1966 and 1971 respectively, and had put a greater focus on TV at the expense of their feature films. Equally damaging was the Don Bluth Company, established by former Disney animator Don Bluth, who took several animators from Disney when he left. The Bluth Company made some iconic and acclaimed animations like An American Tail, The Land Before Time, and All Dogs Go to Heaven, very quickly becoming Disney's key competitor. Disney's failures culminated in 1985's The Black Cauldron, which at the time was the most expensive animated film ever made, but was seen as too dark and failed to make back its production budget at the box office. The future of Disney's animation department looked bleak until Oliver and Company and Who Framed Roger Rabbit both reinvigorated the company's expectations for animated films and led to a big push for 1989's feature The Little Mermaid. The years that followed saw the Disney Renaissance, a return to form for the studio and some of their best and most consistent work in decades. Like so many of Disney's later successful feature films, The Little Mermaid was one Walt himself was interested in making in the early days of the studio, but he eventually steered away from the idea. Walt's initial thoughts, which he began to develop in the 1930s, were to make it as part of a package film, a larger animation made up of smaller stories, each being different fairy tales from the fabled children's author Hans Christian Andersen. Born in 1805, Hans Christian Andersen was an author that wrote numerous books, poems, plays, and most famously fairy tales. These include The Emperor's New Clothes, a version of which would eventually evolve into Disney's The Emperor's New Groove, The Princess and the Pea, Thumbelina, The Ugly Duckling, The Snow Queen, which would partly inspire Disney's Frozen, and The Little Mermaid. Andersen's fairy tales have gone on to influence generations ever since they were written, famous for having a hidden, deeper meaning that teaches the audience a lesson. Most of the key elements and events of the animated film were taken from the original story, including Ariel's longing to experience the human world, saving a drowning prince, making a deal with a sea witch, losing her voice in exchange for legs, and after the Little Mermaid and the prince meet and begin to like each other, the prince then admits his love for another human princess who he believes saved him from drowning, as he never saw the Little Mermaid do it. Some darker elements that the Disney film omitted include mermaids having no souls after death as opposed to humans who went to heaven, further incentivizing Ariel's desire to become a human. The Sea Witch's deal also comes with the sinister side effect of Ariel's feet feeling like she is constantly walking on knives. The prince marries someone else and the Little Mermaid's sisters then show up with a magical knife, another delightful gift from the Sea Witch that will return the mermaid's tail if she murders the prince and drips his blood over her feet. She realizes she can't kill the prince as she still loves him, so instead jumps off the ship and tries to kill herself. For her good deeds of, I guess, not murdering someone, she is made into an air spirit and told that after 300 years of helping more humans, which we can only assume means just not murdering people, she'll then get to go to heaven. So all in all, it's pretty clear why Disney decided to alter these horrific events and make it much more family friendly. After the mouse-themed take on Sherlock Holmes in The Great Mouse Detective, which was directed by Dave Michener, Bernie Manson, Ron Clements and John Musker, Clements and Musker were looking for their next project. In a 1985 meeting with Michael Eisner, the then CEO, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, Disney's animation chairman, the higher-ups of Disney had to pitch 5 ideas for new features. Clements found the story of The Little Mermaid in a bookstore and wrote a short treatment of how Disney could do an animated version. He presented the idea, but Katzenberg rejected it, as the live-action studio was working on a sequel to Splash. According to Clements, Katzenberg changed his mind and greenlit the project the following day. Clements and Musker began working on the screenplay, and once their work was completed on The Great Mouse Detective, full production could begin on The Little Mermaid. Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, the men responsible for the off-Broadway Little Shop of Horrors, came on board to provide the film's music. Ashman worked on the songs and lyrics, and Menken wrote the score, beginning a partnership with Disney that would define the Renaissance era. Ashman's input proved invaluable. He suggested that the planned English butler crab become Jamaican to help reflect the style of the music he envisioned, which he saw as adding more of a modern spin. Interestingly, the small red English butler creature then moved to Musker and Clements' next feature in 1992's Aladdin, where it was meant to be Iago. That character was then similarly changed when Gilbert Gottfried was cast, and that type of character eventually found a place in 1994's The Lion King with Zazu. Ashman also ended up rewriting some crucial scenes when the story needed some work. This included the scene where Sebastian tries to convince Ariel to go home, but eventually concedes, and adding dialogue to the scene where Triton decides to give Ariel legs, which was previously meant to just have music. This collective approach to the story was pushed by Peter Schneider, the then president of Disney Feature Animation. Once development began on the movie, the animators found the original work from the 1930s. The Little Mermaid had a large emphasis on being a return to a classic Disney style. Not only was it the first full musical they'd done in years, but it was the first fairy tale since Sleeping Beauty in 1959, 30 years before The Little Mermaid's release. In that vein, the animators went back to Disney's most iconic movies for inspiration and reference. Glenn Keane, who animated Ariel and would go on to animate key characters such as the Beast, Aladdin and Pocahontas, looked to Alice from Alice in Wonderland, who he cited as having a youthful quality with extremely expressive eyes and eyebrows, something that he hoped to bring to Ariel. In terms of style, The Little Mermaid proved particularly difficult as much of it took place underwater, meaning that almost every scene had several moving parts. The animators went to the iconic underwater scene in Pinocchio for reference on how to animate underwater. The animators also looked at lots of underwater footage and people in space to make sure the underwater scenes were as realistic as possible. The Little Mermaid was the last Disney feature film to be cel-painted, with following movies being coloured digitally. It was also one of the first to utilise CGI for certain scenes, such as the staircase, ship and carriage. The studio decided to film live-action reference for the movie, a practice that had receded in recent years, in particular with animal-based movies like The Great Mouse Detective and Oliver & Company. Howard Ashman's input at a story level far surpassed some scene rewrites, and he ended up telling much of the story through the music. Ashman and Menken saw the songs as key to the characters' arcs and wanted to make them a critical part of the film, which was something Disney had lost in recent years. This led to many stating that the classic Broadway musical had found a new home in animation. For Part of Your World, Ashman made sure it felt as intimate and emotional as possible. He thought it was important to bring a sense of caged emotions and wanted less voice, but more intensity from Jodie Benson. Part of Your World was very nearly removed from the film after Katzenberg saw children becoming unsettled during a test screening. He insisted it be removed despite protests from Musker, Clements and Ashman, but eventually listened to Glenn Keane, who was animating the sequence, and realised the movie needed the song. Alan Menken wrote the movie's Oscar-winning score, and Under the Sea won Best Song at the Academy Awards, rounding out the movie's critical success with an acknowledgement of how important the music was to the film. A huge amount of changes meant that the only real thing remaining in Disney's version is the core characters. For the titular Little Mermaid, whilst Jodie Benson voiced her, Sherry Stoner was Ariel's reference, and would provide footage from Belle from Beauty and the Beast. Glenn Keane and Mark Henn also looked to Alyssa Milano's character from Who's the Boss for Ariel's inspiration. Christopher Barnes voiced Prince Eric and emphasised imagining the scenes whilst recording so that he could really embody the character. For the movie's villain, Ursula, the animation department wanted something very unique and based around the drag artist Divine and a squid. After B. Arthur turned it down and Elaine Stritch left after disagreements with Ashman, Pat Carroll was cast. Both Jodie Benson and Pat Carroll cite Ashman's versions of the songs as guidelines for their own. This included them using some of his improvisations. The cast was rounded out by Samuel E. Wright as Sebastian, Buddy Hackett as Scuttle, Jason Marin as Flounder, Ben Wright as Grimsby, and Kenneth Mars as King Triton. The Little Mermaid became a smash hit for girls, boys and adults almost immediately. It made over $184 million at the global box office during its initial release, which was record-breaking at the time. It also continued its cinematic run for much longer than anticipated, with several re-releases across different markets over the following years only adding to that amount. To capitalise on the success, a VHS was released only 6 months after the initial box office run, which was almost unheard of, in particular with Disney, where movie theatre re-releases were the common practice. As a result of the revolutionary move, that VHS became 1990's highest selling movie and the 25th best selling of all time in the US. A large factor in the film's success was a huge shift in marketing. In some cases, the film was advertised to appeal to an adult-only audience, and is one of the first examples of using every part of Disney's empire to sell the film across all possible platforms, with a range of advertisements, merchandise and theme park attractions pushing the film simultaneously. The film was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, winning Best Score and Best Song for Under the Sea, with Kiss the Girl also being nominated. As The Little Mermaid was the start of Disney's Renaissance era, it's only fitting that it began a wave of controversies that cropped up time and again in the fabled period, namely the inclusion of sexually suggestive imagery. In The Little Mermaid's case, it was 2 unfortunately placed and apparently accidental body parts. The first is the bishop during the wedding of Eric and Vanessa, a disguised Ursula. Although Disney animators have claimed the bulge to be the bishop's knee, there's no denying that it looks as though his excitement for the ceremony is showing itself in a rather unfortunate way. Similarly, the original cover for the movie also had a suspicious looking tower on the underwater castle. Both the scene and cover were altered for subsequent re-releases after multiple complaints, and of course someone tried to sue Disney with little success. Although a huge hit, The Little Mermaid had a much larger wait for any kind of follow-up than many other Renaissance movies. The Disney Channel series began 3 years later in 1992, focusing on a younger Ariel set before the film. But the feature-length direct sequel wasn't released until 2000, 11 years after the original. This came after a string of other successful direct-to-video sequels that began with the Aladdin sequel, The Return of Jafar. This sequel was titled The Little Mermaid 2: Return to the Sea, and centered on Melody, Ariel and Eric's daughter, who ironically wanted to be part of the mermaid world rather than the human one. Another Little Mermaid movie, The Little Mermaid: Ariel's Beginning, came in 2008, nearly 20 years after the original, and was another prequel. The characters of The Little Mermaid have also featured across a variety of Disney properties, including the House of Mouse TV series, theme park attractions, and the Kingdom Hearts video games. Overall, The Little Mermaid had a turbulent production period, one marred with doubt and concerns, and lots of cooks in the kitchen, but eventually came together as more than a match for the classic Disney fairy tales. The Little Mermaid has since gone on to become one of the company's biggest franchises, and reinvigorated an animation studio on the decline into a golden era of features. This resurgence was in turn a huge factor of Disney's near global domination only a few decades later.